Welcome to Breathe, a weekly audio podcast presented by Breath of Life. And now, here's the host, Pastor W. Snell, and co-host David Person.
Welcome to Breathe. I'm David Person, the co-host of this podcast that is produced by the Breath of Life television ministry. To my left is the host of the podcast, Pastor W. Snell. He's the speaker director for Breath of Life, and he is also the senior pastor of the Oakwood University Church. How are you?
Hey, Dave. I'm good. I'm glad to be here. It's another Monday.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here in the studio with you and Pastor Nugent and just pouring into our Breathe family.
Absolutely.
Thank y'all for joining us once again.
Yeah, and we're doing something new that we're going to be doing on an ongoing basis. We're on camera, so people will not only be able to hear us on Spotify and some of the other audio platforms, Pastor Nugent, but they'll be able to see us on YouTube.
On YouTube,
right?
that's correct. So these will live on YouTube, and some of you have probably already seen them on YouTube, but just in audio form.
Right.
And so now we'll be adding a video component there.
Okay, very cool. And
This may be somebody's first time seeing you live, David.
That's true. I hope it doesn't scare too many people off. You know, I mean, they're used to seeing you, but they're not used to seeing me.
But you know how it is when you're used to hearing somebody's voice, like on radio?
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw Tom Joyner in person. I was like, it didn't connect. It did not connect.
Yeah.
It didn't connect. So,
Oh, man.
it's going to be somebody's first time.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And of course, today, because this is a new thing, Pastor Nugent is he's here right next to me.
That's right.
But you don't see him. But he is here.
I'm here.
He's in the studio.
I am here. I'm right next to Pastor.
Yeah,
I'm right next to
pastor.
to David Person.
That'd be my grandfather, not me. Not me. Yeah.
But man, it's good to be here, and we're excited for the Breathe audience to take this journey with us. You know, Breathe has been around for a while. It has served in many different capacities and facets, touched on so many different topics, and touched so many lives. Showcased so many different guests as well, and some of their testimonies, and we've been able to learn from those experiences and benefit from those. So I want to continue that trajectory now with a little bit of video. So that's going to be good. It's going to be good.
And we thank you for that, Pastor Nugent. Somebody was just telling me, Pastor Snell, that they listened to, they went all the way back to one of our first episodes together when we had you and Sister Snell on.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And we were talking about your journey through the valley of trying to become parents and just how powerful that was for them. That reminds me, we need to get Sister Snell back on.
Oh, got to get her back in the studio.
Get her back on.
Yeah. Of course, definitely.
Today, we're going to tackle a topic that is challenging for a lot of people, especially those who are believers who are trying to reconcile the faith walk with the challenges of life.
Very much.
And the topic is suffering.
Yeah.
It's suffering. Suffering is a part of life. And yet, as believers, we are taught that we can live above suffering and can push past suffering. Let's just go on and wade into it.
Yeah.
When suffering comes up, Pastor Snell, in ministry, as you deal with members and maybe even non-members who are experiencing suffering, what seems to be the general challenge for people? What are they wrestling with?
You know, I think one of the reasons I wanted to really have this conversation is for those who are listening or watching, however you're consuming this today. I think every person has to develop their own theology or rubric for suffering or why bad things happen. It's interesting. I remember one day I was at the gas station and someone pumping gas at my truck. And in front of me, there's this guy. He's got a kind of a beat up truck. You know, he just looks like he's had a bad day, had a cast on his arm, had some bruises kind of look like maybe he's been in an altercation. And he just had this look of exhaustion in his face and just kind of looked depleted. But he had this bumper sticker on the back of his truck, and I'll never forget it. And I'm not going to say exactly what it said, but to paraphrase it, it just said, stuff happens.
Yeah. Stuff
That's
happens.
not exactly what it said.
Right.
And it's funny because that was like one of those moments that kind of stuck out to me, because one of the things I think most people don't really know how to process is the presence of bad, evil, suffering, difficulty. And so I think he kind of whittled his philosophy down into those two words, like stuff just happens. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Whereas I think we tend to kind of have a broader view of kind of why things happen. But I'm saying all that to say, believers have a wide range of interpretations for why bad things are happening. There are a lot of people that believe, okay, this is happening because I'm under spiritual attack or assault from the enemy. But I think the larger motif is that there's this belief that, especially when there's physical sickness or financial challenge or professional challenge, that maybe there is some type of judgment or punishment that is coming from God, and they look at it through that particular lens. And then I think that there are some who just don't know why. And one of the things I've learned is that, suffering and specifically pain, it will change your worldview on everything. It'll change your perception of the Bible, your perception of God, your understanding of faith. It is kind of the one thing that keeps that will remold your entire worldview. And that's why I think every believer or every person has to come to some fundamental conclusions and fundamental convictions about what suffering is, what role it plays, what it is, and what it is not.
Well, let's go ahead and let's tackle at least part of the elephant in the room, which is that many conclude, correctly or incorrectly, that God is the source of suffering. Do you agree with that?
Wow.
No, no. I mean, it even goes against his stated objective for coming. Jesus says in John 10 and verse 10, it is the thief that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He says, I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Even when God is talking in the book of Jeremiah to a disobedient, hard-hearted people in Israel, you know what he says to them? He says, I know the plans I have for you. Listen, they have rebelled against him. They've erected idols and all of these gardens to Ashtoreth and all these things. But he says, man, I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a future and a hope. And so one of the things I do believe is I don't think that God inflicts evil or punishment, because God is not petty. Like, see, a big part of this, David, I think has to do with your view of God. I think that there are some of us that still look at God as the God of wrath. It's interesting that most of us we kind of split our perception of God based on testaments. So Old Testament is like judgment, fury, angry. Jesus comes down as the nicer version of God, so on and so forth. Nicer version. When the truth is, like, if you actually read the Bible, God is as long-suffering in the Old Testament as he is in the person of Jesus. Like, that's actually why Jesus had to come. He had to come and show us what God was actually like.
There it is.
Like the sacrifice, that was just the final nail in the mission or the final completion of the mission. But he wanted to give the world a picture of what God was actually like. And so when I look at even difficulties that may come, while we may be straying or erring or something like that, remember in the book of Hebrews, the Bible says, whom God loves, he chastens. And see, I think there's a big difference between, the God who chastens, because chastening, all of us have kids. All right. And, the easy thing to do is to just kind of say, to let your kids have their way, to not try to correct wrong ways of thinking or looking at it or doing it. But even your chastening acts, that's not revenge. That's not punishment. You don't even necessarily give them what they deserve. Like, even those times where I am chastened by God, even through certain circumstances, it is, really for God to preserve life, to draw me back in relationship with him, and to ultimately preserve those great aims that he has for each and every one of us.
So what I'm hearing you say is that chastening, and that's sort of that's a word that's almost obsolete. But,
Yeah, it is.
But in Christian circles, we know what it means. It's the discipline of God.
Yeah.
Or what we perceive as God dispensing discipline to us. Chastening may look like or manifest itself as suffering, but it's not suffering that is retributive or punitive.
Right. Yeah. It's redemptive in both purpose and in outcome.
Yeah, I mean, in order for the muscle to grow, it must break. Right? So when you work out, you break that muscle, and that can feel like suffering. Let me tell you, you do
you
50 squats, you're gonna feel that thing.
Yeah, you are.
But
suffering.
you will feel like it's suffering. But it is required in order for that thing to grow. It is required for you to get better. It's required for you to have that the capacity to take on more. And I think, depending on where you are and what it is you're doing and what your calling might be, there is a component there. And I've heard this term used, and maybe you guys can help me in terms of the cross, right? You take up your cross, and people say, "Oh, this is my cross to bear." And sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But we have a joke in our home where we will say, "That's not your cross. That's your crop." Right? Because that's actually what you have planted.
Yeah.
You're actually reaping what you've sown, right? But not every time is it a crop though. There are times where it is a cross for you to bear. So but both of them still look like suffering.
So in that analogy, the crop is something that is the result of consequences. It's a consequence, basically.
It's a consequence,
as
absolutely.
opposed to maybe a circumstance that is designed to foster growth and development.
Absolutely.
I like that, Pastor Nugent. We got to get you on camera, man.
Yeah. He's got
that's a good one.
We got to get him out of timeout. He's already. He's in video timeout.
Yeah. Listen, we gonna get there, man. We just one or two pieces of equipment. We're there.
So,
but even there's a terminology, because I do think so. Some of these terminologies, because I think they impact the way we view God.
Yeah.
So like even as opposed to saying it's a consequence, they're just certain things that are a result. You know what I'm saying? Like if I sow apple seeds, the result is I'm going to get apples.
Right.
There should never be a time where I plant fig seeds and expect to be able to the result to be pears.
Yeah.
And so I think that even with consequences, again it has a certain connotation
to it,
and that kind of puts a certain shadow on the character of God. But I think at the end of the day, there's a certain result, which is why when the question is asked, does God punish evil? Right. One of the things I think is that evil inevitably brings its own punishment. Like I do think that there are times where, man, God's hand kind of shields and shelters us from certain results of evil.
Yes.
And I think that there are times where he kind of removes his hands depending upon our hardness or sternness of heart in a certain direction and allows us to kind of be buffeted by some of the results. But I don't think it's necessarily God sending curse, God sending judgment. But the end of the day is if I am a messy, mean, harsh, greedy person, there are results that inevitably are going to flow out of that lifestyle.
What we call cause and effect.
Cause and effect. Yes, very much.
Yeah.
If I am reckless relationally with the way I deal with people, at a certain point, there's going to be a result. Again, I think it's funny because God has been very merciful to me in the way I treat my body, right? Probably should have had some different results. But if you treat your body in a certain way, there are results.
Yeah.
And I think we, as people of faith, we kind of are polarized in it. Yeah. Either it's God blessing us or God cursing us, but there's some things in between.
Yeah, I'll just throw this in there as well, just as a personal testimony. For about a month, my license was suspended because I'd racked up so many points because of tickets.
Wow.
So for a month, I could not drive. For an entire month, I had to sit in that passenger seat and allow Kanique to drive me around for an entire month.
Yeah.
I had to be dropped off and picked up. I had to organize my schedule for a month.
My Lord.
And I never turned around and said, this is the system. This is the man. They're holding me down. No, I knew about every one of those tickets.
Yeah.
I knew exactly what was causing me to get this result.
Yeah.
But I think it's that perspective. And sometimes you need that time. I'm going to be honest. I think the 1 month was a grace period, right? Because you could get your license back after that. But the next time you would have it suspended for a year.
Wow.
So this was kind of leading up to that bigger thing. And I think there's a lot of our situations in life that kind of give you those warning signs.
Yeah.
Hey, you might want to pause here.
Right.
Man, I felt something in my knee. Yeah, but you've been kind of running pretty hard.
Yeah.
And when we get those warning signs, sometimes we push past, and then we end up with the bigger result.
That's true.
The bigger
Yeah.
effect, as they say, cause and effect.
Cause and effect.
Right.
Yeah.
So does God, we're agreed that God is not necessarily the purveyor or the source of suffering, but God certainly allows suffering.
Oh, yeah. So, one of the things I tell people, and it's kind of a tough thing to kind of reconcile at times, a lot of suffering is not earned, it's inherited. So God kind of placed these parameters and, at the very beginning that says, okay, Adam and Eve, you can eat from every tree of the garden, but this one, you shouldn't eat of it. If you touch it, lest you die. And it wasn't that, man, when they ate the fruit, they were going to just drop dead. But what was going to happen is that mortality would then become a part of their world. That, again, death, sickness, calamity, it's just a part of our ecosystem. Like that's really a part of what happens when God permitted choice and free will to be a part of man's construct and his world. So that there are certain things, that you don't necessarily ask for this, warrant this. This is not necessarily the result of your choosing, but the fact that there is violence in the world, the fact that there is hate in the world, that there is murder in the world, that there is sickness. Some is a result of our choice. Some is not. Is completely the result of somebody else's choice.
Yeah.
Or the fact that there is, pandemics. What I'm saying, that crawl across the earth. All of this is simply an outgrowth or a part of the inheritance that was left by our first parents, Adam and Eve, when they kind of forfeited God's ultimate plan for mankind. They unleashed something that would go upon all generations, and it touches everybody, because that's the one thing. It's funny. There's a statement that says, "What makes life fair is that it's unfair to everybody." I mean, it touches all of us, and so I think that that's one of the things that I would want somebody to know is this: certain things are just the result of Adam and Eve's sin, and that's why Romans 5 says that death reigned from Adam all the way down to Christ.
To Christ,
and death was never interrupted until Christ came.
Well, we're almost out of time for today's episode, so I want to ask you this in closing, Pastor Snell. What's your advice on handling seasons of suffering?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, because there's just so many different layers to suffering. So these principles are generally they're broad principles that we're going to kind of lay out. Number one, I think that 1 Peter 5 and verse 7 says that we can cast all of our cares upon him because he cares for us. I love what the promise of Philippians says. It says that that we ought not be anxious about anything, but to pray about all things, and with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace that passes all understanding will guard your heart and mind through Christ Jesus. I think one of the things that I try to let people know is that the result of prayer is not that it immediately changes things, but I think it immediately brings peace to the soul. So until that circumstance changes, like my inner soul can be blanketed with a peace that the Bible literally says transcends understanding. Like it won't even make sense, the level of tranquility that you can have in the midst of an outer circumstance that's very chaotic. I think the other thing, when you're in a season of suffering, I think you need to guard your inner circle very well. I think you need to surround yourself with sound counsel, people that know what to say, people who know when it's okay to be quiet, people who can just kind of stand with you, that have the gift of empathy and compassion, and then, of course, people that have an active spiritual pulse. So I think, number two, you have to kind of really kind of guard your inner circle as well. And then I think the third thing I'd probably say is that, all right, one of the things I've learned is that, man, you cannot accelerate a season of suffering. You can't wish it away. You can't hurry it up. The same way, like, you can't rush summertime, like when it's cold. Like, you have to wait for that season to pass. But one of the things I've learned is that, you cannot sit around and lick your wounds. Like, you got to still live every day with purpose.
Yeah.
Like, you still got to get up and do what it is that you were created to do. If you have clarity on what that is, again, it doesn't make it all go away. But like, I don't know if you've ever been in like somewhere where you don't want to be. Like, man, like,
Sure.
You're maybe at a job or just somewhere waiting or like when I'm in the airport, like I'm stuck on a layover.
Yep.
The worst thing I can do is just sit here and just watch the clock all day. And wait for it to pass. Like, no, I got to do some work. I got to be about something. I got to throw myself into purpose. Because again, it won't make the season go by faster, but it'll make the waiting just a little bit less tenuous when I'm not just sitting there watching the clock. So I think those are just a few things, and then I just think, really you got to fill your mind with good things. Like, the things that you read should be reinforced maybe perhaps by the songs that you listen to. Like, because really, when we talk about especially spiritual attacks when they come, it is a warfare of the mind. It is to kind of overwhelm with discouragement, fear, intimidation, anxiety. And so even we go back to the crop concept. You got to be careful what you're planting in seasons of suffering.
Right.
Just because, that harvest or that crop is going to kind of come full circle. So you got to make sure that you're feeding your soul very, very well in a season of difficulty.
Strong words there. Strong words. Great advice from Pastor W. Snell and Pastor Kirk Nugent, who is here.
He's in the building.
He's just a little bit off to the side there, but he's here. Well, that wraps up Breathe for this episode. I'm David Person. God bless you. And don't forget, no matter how challenging life may be, no matter how much suffering you may be experiencing at this particular time, reflect on what was said today by the pastors, and then stop, pray, and breathe.
Breathe is produced by David Person for Breath of Life. Christian Lawson and Damian Malone provide production assistance. The opening theme was produced by David Person and James Bowman. James Bowman and Kelvin Wooten produced the closing theme. Special thanks to our broadcast partner, WJOU-FM Oakwood University Radio. Episodes of Breathe can be found on your favorite podcasting platforms. Please like them and share. Until next time, when life gets difficult, don't forget to breathe.